Almost summer. Tick season, well, it's upon us again. Grace Bradley made her way to the UMaine Tick Lab to hear what things are looking like this year and what we can do to protect ourselves.
As we enter summer here in Maine, people are prepping their grills and their camps to enjoy the nice weather. Another thing people should be prepared for are ticks. At the University of Maine's Tick Lab, they receive thousands of ticks for species identification, DNA testing, and possible hotspot locations.
The most common tick species that we're likely to encounter here in Maine are something called the deer tick or black-legged tick and the American dog tick. The deer tick is the tick that's responsible for transmitting Lyme disease and anaplasmosis and Powassan virus, all of the tick-borne pathogens that we have here in the state of Maine. The dog tick, while it can transmit pathogens in other parts of the country, is not known to carry them here, so really it's more of a nuisance species so far.
Dill says cases of Lyme disease and other tick-borne pathogens have been on the rise in the past 15 to 20 years. This is most likely due to the increase of deer ticks as they spread from south to north and to the down east region. He recommends taking precautions anytime you are outside.
What we found from the submissions coming into the lab here and an accompanying survey that's done is that most of the people that send in ticks to us pick them up in the home landscapes. So it's when they're out doing yard work, gardening, just playing outside, taking the pets outside. So even in those kind of instances where they're just going outside for a short period of time, it's really important to take some personal precautions to protect themselves against ticks. Wearing protective clothing and gear, light-colored clothing so ticks show up easily, and of course the use of EPA and CDC recommended insect repellents. If you do find a tick on yourself, on your child, your pet, removing it as quickly as possible is important. So monitoring that bite site for any potential rash. If you're starting to feel flu-like symptoms during the spring, summer, fall months, those are kind of red flags for potential tick-borne disease infection as well.
Grace Bradley, WABI TV5 News, Old Town.